You're called into a meeting, the door closes, and in the next 60 seconds, your professional identity gets pulled out from under you. Redundancy is one of the most disorientating, destabilizing things that can happen in your career, and most of us have absolutely no idea how to handle it. Today, I'm talking to Steve Jaffe, author of The Layoff Journey, about why being made redundant isn't just a career setback, it's a grief event, and why the worst thing you can do is pretend that you're fine and scramble straight back out there, and why the real path forward starts with something that sounds counterintuitive: radical acceptance, sitting with it, owning it, and then using it as the launch pad for something better. Because for Steve, and for so many people that he and I have worked with, redundancy didn't just change their career, it changed their life for the better.
Welcome to The Career Equation, a practical formula for career conversations that helps businesses and their leaders to engage, retain, and grow their talent.
Hosted by Erica Sosner, Career Equation creator, and Zoe Schofield, careers expert and equation enthusiast. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Career Equation podcast. And I'm excited to be here today with Steve Jaffe, author of The Layoff Journey, with personal experience of the pain of redundancy occurring not once, not twice, not 3 times, but 4 times. He's really a world authority on the coping mechanisms that we need to put in place to thrive post-redundancy. And the book is filled with a fascinating set of tips, tools, and individual perspectives to help all of us make the transition to make a redundancy the opportunity to step into something fantastic and new. So very warm welcome to you, Steve. I'm excited to have you here today.
Thanks so much. It's great to be here. I appreciate it.
Now, of course, the word redundancy strikes pain and fear into the hearts of everyone who hears it. It's such a horrible word just in itself, the idea of being redundant as an individual. And you talk fantastically, both in terms of your individual experience and the kind of universal experience of the kind of dispiriting, depressing experience of being made redundant after years of loyal service. And, unfortunately, it is a reality that most of our listeners will have experienced or are likely to experience at least once or twice in their careers, just given the volatility of the world that we live in. So I would love to start off with a little bit of perspective and thoughts from you about the first things that you would say to someone in the same position, given your experience and the journey that you share in the book.
Well, first I'll say in America, we use the term a layoff, and I've done podcasts and book promotions in Australia and the UK, and I know you guys refer to them as redundancies. So if you hear me refer to it as a layoff, we're saying the same thing with just a little different word for our geography. But if you've just been laid off or made redundant, the first thing I would want you to hear is this, and that is nothing about this means that you've failed. A layoff is simply a business decision. It's not a verdict on your talent, your work ethic, or your personal self-worth. What you're feeling right now isn't weakness, it's grief, and grief deserves some time and some space, not a rushed resume update. So before you try and fix it or hustle your way out of it, slow down, breathe, and accept what has happened so that you can process it. Once you stop fighting the reality of the situation and get out of the denial and the anger and all of those stages of grief, it opens you up to healing. So you don't just recover from a layoff, but you rebuild your life stronger and you move forward with clarity instead of fear.
I thought that this relationship and recognition about the journey of a layoff being similar to, not similar to, the same as the experience of any grief, of any loss in our lives was really, really powerful element of your book. And it really spoke to me when I looked at Kübler-Ross's grief cycles and also the work that we use in the Career Equation of Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, which is all about a kind of transformational experience, which is often forced upon you, which is, I think, part of the most painful aspect of a layoff is the powerlessness of something being done to you, something happening to you. And, of course, like work is so central to our identity. You mentioned in the book that over 83% of Americans see that a good career is really core to their sense of their self-esteem. And that the combination of losing your work and your work identity, along with the financial perils of healthcare, financial stability, if your visa depends on being employed, and even the impacts it can have on a relationship, it really is like any other traumatic loss. And it strikes me that we don't come out of it the same person that we went in. So I'd love to hear a bit more about your thoughts and your kind of deep diving about the kind of pain and the shock of a layoff.
Yeah, you mentioned in the intro my experience having 4 layoffs. And what I found from that is there's a parallel path to the Elizabeth Kübler-Ross stages of grief. And any traumatic life event, whether that's the death of a loved one, a divorce, and a layoff counts as one of those really traumatic life events. As humans, this is how we process that trauma. It begins with the stage of denial, moves through anger, bargaining, depression, and then on kind of the other side of this, as you start to see the light at the end of the tunnel, you start to get into acceptance and recovery and renewal. Understanding that helped me frame what I was feeling was normal. It was not uncommon to how, any traumatic event would be experienced both emotionally, physically, psychologically. That's just how our body processes these things. So as I start to understand that a layoff isn't just a career event, it's really a grief event. And like you said, you're not just losing a paycheck, but you're losing identity, structure, community. Your brain processes that loss the same way it would any major life disruption. So when you feel denial, anger, sadness, confusion, sometimes all in the same day, you understand it as grief, not as failure. And then you stop rushing to fix it, and then you can start healing. And that's what helps you move forward stronger and clearer. And I think that the disassociation of experiencing a layoff as a personal failure, because people can put that on themselves. Like, what did I do wrong? I must have made a mistake. I must have not done something right, because we have this myth of meritocracy that says, if I work hard enough, I'm smart enough, I'll be met with success, and somehow it'll insulate me and protect me from things like a layoff. And that's just not the case. I've seen in January, the employee of the year get laid off in June. They were held up as the model employee, everything that you were supposed to mirror, yet they weren't protected. And what it comes down to is there's nothing that you can do to protect yourself from a layoff. You could be the hardest worker or the best employee. It's simply a business decision based on the employer and their need to cut revenue in difficult times. So as you start to dissect this, you kind of take away some of the power that sometimes we can give this experience, right? And I think all of that sort of, I don't like to think of it in like clinical terms. I'm not a PhD. I'm speaking from my own 10,000 hours of experience being laid off. But I do think that some of this can help, one, diffuse, and two, give you the roadmap that you need to navigate it so that you come out the other side with a little bit of reflection and some renewal and sort of keeping your eyes on the light at the end of that tunnel instead of looking backward and always wondering, man, what could have I done differently? How could this have happened to me? And all of those questions that you'll never get an answer to.
I think that's so powerful, Steve, and so true. And I think that really often our immediate response after a layoff is to go, pants on fire, I've got to find myself a new job. Like I've got to run forwards and away from what's just happened. And I think the coaching that really comes through in your book is to take that time both to grieve the experience and to kind of take care of yourself, but also to have a chance to kind of consolidate what you've learned through the role you've been in, who you've become now, and what your future aspirations and design of life might ideally be. Because in many instances, I find as a coach that redundancy creates an opportunity that my clients might not otherwise have taken for themselves to jump into something new, to explore a pivot, or even to just recalibrate. They're still in work that they love, but perhaps in a slightly different work design or a different culture or in a slightly tangential industry could suit them even better. So there is in every crisis an opportunity, and we'll certainly be, as we go through today, exploring some of your tools and perspectives about how to make the most out of that happening to you. And we are in the good conversation, bad conversation format today. So I want us first of all to kind of dive into a little bit of insight from your own experiences of career conversations that have supported and empowered or perhaps been more challenging. And we like to start with the bad conversations because that's where the juicy bits are. Would you like to tell us a little bit about an instance where you found yourself in a career conversation that you would describe as a bit more challenging than you would have liked?
And this was interesting. When you sent me this question, I thought, oh gosh, I had such an inventory to pull from. The list of bad conversations, unfortunately, I felt was quite long. But there's one that stands out at me that I still kind of carry, and I wish I had handled differently. I approached it as an either or. And what I didn't realize was that it could have been a both and. So in my, let's say, immaturity, I only saw one path, and I saw it as very linear, and it didn't need to be. So I was a director level, and we were in the middle of business planning season, and we needed to submit our departmental business plan to our senior management. So it was all hands on deck. Everyone was putting their pieces of the plan together. And I had an employee who on the side had a modeling career that she was trying to get off the ground. And it happened where a modeling job came up that was in the middle of our business planning season. And she asked to take a couple of days off to go do her modeling job. And this was very important to her. She was very excited about it. It was a very important opportunity. And I didn't see that as an opportunity for her. I saw it as something that might take away attention from the department and what we had in front of us. And unfortunately, I told her that she needed to stay in the office and work through the business plan and provide the deliverables. And I guess if I could look back on it, I would have done that much differently. I would have probably said, listen, if you could find a way to get us these deliverables that we need, you can go ahead and take the time and go do this gig that you want to do. Mm-hmm. And I think both of our needs could have been met. And that one in particular, I know that she was really crushed, and I wish that I had sat with that a little bit more and been a little bit more deliberate in how I responded, I think.
Well, thank you for sharing that story, and thank you for the vulnerability of going for a story when you said you had lots to choose from, but going for a story where you thought, you know what, I'm kind of culpable in this situation. I was younger. I didn't have the experience I have now. Knowing what I know now, I might have done it differently, but that's true with everything in hindsight, isn't it? And I think as well, when you're under pressure, when a conversation happens, when you're under pressure, time pressure, business pressure, financial pressure, we're much more disposed to jump into black and white thinking, like getting quite polarized about, it's as you said, an either or. There's only a kind of one way to solve this. And I'm going to need to perhaps exercise more control than had you been in a more relaxed context where you just might have seen more options as available. What were your thoughts on, did you realize as soon as the words came out of your mouth that the conversation was going south, or had you anticipated that it might not be as disappointing as it was for her? At what point did you go, okay, this is going to be tricky?
The look on her face, it spoke volumes. And I knew at that point, I wished that I could have like taken it back and I could have like reflected. What I didn't mention was that I had a boss and I had run this past my boss and he said, no, she's got to stay. And he let me be the bearer of bad news. And I wish I had pushed back more on him and rather than taking kind of the easy way out. But as soon as I saw her face, I knew that, gosh, this meant a lot to her. And I think what I've learned is that nothing at work is really that important. Really, the important things are what happens outside of work. And if you have something that's a real passion for you that you really love and it brings you a lot of joy, that's what you really should be leaning into. And that's where you should be devoting your time and your energy. Mm-hmm. And I think that business plan was not worth her potentially missing, what was for her a very important job, and who knows where it could have led, So I think part of this experience of going through 4 layoffs, you learn to take the power away from them and you learn to take back your own power. And one of the things that you do is by diffusing that situation and by diffusing whatever you read into it, you're empowering yourself. And everything that you mentioned about like pivots and seeing kind of this almost as like a get out of jail free card all come from like really deliberate framing of the experience, which means like not reading into it, not giving it any more energy or oxygen that it needs. So yeah, that was unfortunate.
Yeah, it sounds painful. I really get that. And I really get that tension of, don't shoot the messenger, like being in the middle. And I think a lot of people who are listening, and most of our audience are in the sort of learning and HR and business leader space, will have had that really painful experience that could be about giving the message of a redundancy, of a layoff to somebody that you really care about and value within your team, and the kind of pain of this has been mandated to me and I have no choice. I may have done all the advocacy that I could, but at a certain point, I'm responsible for delivering that message, and just how uncomfortable that place can feel. I wonder if you have any thoughts based on that in terms of supporting people who are giving this difficult message. If you are in an organization and cuts are being made and you're going to have to present, one of the most unpleasant discussions you're going to have with somebody in your team that you value, do you have any advice or thoughts about how to ease that or how to do that in the most sensitive or supportive way?
The simplest advice I can give is if you are a parent and let's say you have children, imagine if your child came home and they told you they got laid off from work today and you asked them, oh gosh, I'm so sorry. Like, how did that go? What happened? Right? You would want that to be a very compassionate, empathetic, a very humane conversation. You would want them to be treated in, a certain way. And what I would say is the person that you're laying off, think about it that way. Think about it. What would you want? How would you want your child to get laid off? Like, what would be the worst case scenario if you had heard, right? That would be a great way for you to make sure that you're approaching the situation with some compassion and some empathy. Mm-hmm. A layoff, you could work for a company for 10 years. And once you're laid off, you might not remember a lot about what that company did or said over those 10 years, but you'll remember how you were laid off. You remember how leadership showed up. You'll remember how you were communicated, the way it was communicated. You'll remember what your severance package looked like. You'll remember all of those things, and all of those things can color what that prior 10 years was. Mm-hmm. And there are ramifications of that show up maybe on Glassdoor, let's say, when alumni is talking about your company with other colleagues. That could impact recruiting. It could impact your ability to even retain your existing employees, because the layoffs send two messages. They send one message to the person that was laid off, and they send another message to the people that stay. And both of those messages will usually end up in some public forum in some way, shape, or form. So even if you have like selfish reasons for trying to do this in a really humane way, you know, that in and of itself, it may not be the best motivation, but you should have that in mind, that all of this is going to end up in some way affecting your ability to retain, hire, and even brand perceptions are impacted. There's legal liability that you need to think about. But, you know, going back to how I started, the simplest thing would be, your goal here is to do this in a humane, empathetic, compassionate way. And if you have in mind, you know, a loved one and how you would want them to experience this, you won't go wrong.
Nice. I think that's really a practical way for somebody to really hold on to how to conduct the communication with dignity. I mean, there are also the kind of ritual humiliations of the process, you know, getting cut out of the system, your card no longer working, the box of staff.
Right. Yeah.
Is there any way to escape that? Have you ever seen an organization being able to handle managing the need to balance security with a kind of diplomatic and a bit more thoughtful exit in any way?
Oh, gosh. You know, there's all of the legal implications that companies have to consider and protect themselves from. But, you know, in the age of Zoom, where people are getting laid off over Zoom, you do miss the humiliation of cleaning out your desk, putting your stuff in a box, having security look over your shoulder, getting escorted out of the room, you know? And like, I worked in a lot of open office configurations. So when you're cleaning out your desk, you're doing it in front of like 100 coworkers. And everybody's trying not to watch, and everybody's feeling really uncomfortable, you know, and you know, the layoff conversation lasts maybe 5 or 10 minutes. So 10 minutes earlier, you were a trusted employee, held with all of the company, you know, secrets and everything. And within 10 minutes now, you've gone to outcast, where you're packing your box and security is looking over your shoulder because they're afraid you're going to do something detrimental to the company. Like that 10-minute swing alone is enough to make your head spin. And then you pile onto there the shame and embarrassment of doing that in front of all of your coworkers, which are probably also some friends, you know? So in a way, the layoff generation over Zoom is a little easier. But it does make it much more sudden, where you'll go from like being the trusted, loyal employee, but now in like 3 minutes, your whole computer and everything shuts down and you're locked out. Like, that's also enough to make your head spin. So look, there's no great way to get laid off. I've heard of people getting laid off while they've been on the road on a business trip. I've heard of women getting laid off when they've been in labor. I just heard a story about a Washington Post employee. The Washington Post just had a bunch of cuts, and they were on the road in Ukraine, reporting from Ukraine, and they got laid off while they were in Ukraine. Doing reporting. Not a great way if you're in a war zone and you've lost access to everything. You no longer have your press pass, and you probably have your credit card expense account shut off.
Yeah, your support system for safety and work.
So like, there are a lot of bad ways to get laid off. There are some that are not so bad, but yeah, you want to try and avoid that shame and embarrassment as much as you can.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's talk then, let's uptick it and talk a little bit about a great career conversation that you were party to. And see what we can learn from that. Would you mind telling us that story?
Oh, gosh. I had a boss who I just absolutely loved. And one of the things I've learned in my 25, 30-year career is great bosses are few and far between. You're going to have a lot of really bad bosses, but those good bosses, you could probably count maybe on less than one hand, maybe a couple of fingers. So she was a special one. And what I loved about her was just her honesty and how she always showed up in a very present way. She was very high up in the organization, had a lot of responsibility. But when I met with her every 2 weeks, we would do status updates. She was always there in a very present way. So it was 2008, and we were in the midst of a really, really bad recession. Like, it was just crashing all around. And the entire market just changed overnight. And I was nervous about my job security. And I asked her if what I was doing was viewed favorably within the organization and if I was sort of viewed as like an essential business function. And she replied, "You're doing exactly what we hired you to do. Keep doing what you're doing and don't worry about it." And it was said in a way that was just very genuine and very honest. And I held on to that response. I was there for about 5 years, and I held on to that response for that duration because it just gave me a sense of security. It gave me a sense of confidence in myself that what I was doing was good, and it's not often you get a lot of pats on the back at work. So when you do get them, they mean a lot. And that gave me confidence in myself, confidence in my job security. But she also took the opportunity to tell me what I was doing that I could improve and what I was doing that might help make me more successful. And in my career, I also found that, you got a performance review once a year, but you didn't get a lot of feedback outside of that, and everybody talks about like continual ongoing feedback. It never really manifests. And even in a performance review, things kind of just get like painted over with broad brushstrokes, and nobody really wants to have like difficult conversations even if they can be made positive, right? So like constructive feedback is always a good thing, and it's something I always took as like I welcomed it. But she didn't like shy away from the opportunity and just like brush me off and say, "Yeah, you're doing a great job. Keep up the good work." Like, she took it to heart and said, "Look, you're doing a good job. Let me tell you a couple things you could do to do even better," right? Like, that was a great coaching moment that she took advantage of. So that, to me, it just stuck with me. I just appreciated that honesty. I'm in marketing and advertising, and I didn't find a lot of honesty in that line of work. So she was a special boss that stood out.
No, I really hear that. And I'm curious about what it did for your relationship with her and with the organization, that this feedback came your way, not as an obligation of part of the performance process, not in relation, because often feedback is kind of tactically related. It's related to the tasks that you are engaged in the work you're trying to get accomplished right now, as opposed to feedback that can really further and advance your career, help you identify your blind spots, help you identify potentials and opportunities you might not have spotted. What difference did that attention to a very personalized level of feedback about you and your career make to your relationship with the organization and with her?
Well, it told me where I needed to double down and keep going and keep doing what I was doing. And it told me how the organization viewed the work that I was doing. Like, I thought I was doing what I was hired to do, right? But I wasn't entirely sure. Like, if you looked at the ROI of what I was doing on a like tangible way wasn't, in comparison to other initiatives that the company was doing, it wasn't as high. But what I was doing was I was bringing quality, not quantity. And in a time of 2008, and everybody was looking for quantity, there was a kind of a pervasive sentiment that quality was less important. And what she had told me was, we're still very much invested in quality. What you're doing is bringing quality business prospects and revenue to the bottom line. And that's very much aligned with our goals. So keep doing what you're doing. Don't worry about the fact that you're not doing it in like very large numbers. In this particular instance, the quality of the customer outweighed the quantity. And that then just gave me the assurance to double down, keep doing what I was doing. And after that, I never really looked back. And I felt like that was the turning point where then I was able to move forward and have some real success there.
Yeah. So it really was a contributing factor for you being able to focus your attention on excellence within that organization and knowing what worked. Because I think so often you have to kind of guess the alignment between what you think is an important aspect of your job or like the way in which you're supposed to approach it and what the organization needs from you. And I think the power of a good career conversation is to really together focus that intention and get super clear about what success looks like on both sides and how you capitalize on the opportunities the organization presents and the talents that you bring that present an opportunity to the organization. So how do you find that alignment, I think, is so important. So thank you for sharing that story too. I'd like to talk a little bit more about some of the insights and tools that you have in this book, because there's so many great practical things that can really help people. And I want to start with on the back of the kind of shock and awe of suddenly you click off your Zoom and no longer are employed, or you're in the middle of Ukraine and realize you don't know how you're going to get home from this idea of being in that experience, and then embracing radical acceptance, which sounds like, quite controversial in relation to an experience such as redundancy. Can you explain to listeners what radical acceptance is and why you consider it such a powerful tool for this particular moment in one's career?
It is. It's a big word, and it has a lot of weight to it, but it's not a difficult concept. It involves acknowledging what can't be changed, letting go of the need to control outcomes, embracing the emotions and thoughts and circumstances just as they are. I don't know if you're familiar with the serenity prayer. It says, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. There's a little bit of the serenity prayer in understanding radical acceptance. So in the face of job loss, radical acceptance might look like someone saying, this is painful and difficult, but it has happened and I can face it. Like that to me gives me a lot of strength to go on and get out of bed and keep going. Yes, it's painful. Yes, it's difficult, but it's happened and I'm going to deal with it. I'm going to be okay. And I think, that last sentence, telling yourself you're going to be okay, you have to pick yourself up, and you don't want to get mired in all of the negativity around the emotions of the layoff. So it helps because it means letting yourself feel the grief and frustration without getting stuck in what if or if only, all of those backward looking questions that you're asking yourself that you're never going to get the answers to. When you can accept what you can't change, you free up the energy to heal, move forward, and focus on what comes next instead of what's behind you. And that's, to me, that unlocked a lot of this in terms of coping mechanisms and strategies for success and moving forward. If you change the question to what if or if only, and you change that question to what's next, you let go of the backward looking, rear view mirror perspective. And all of a sudden you're looking forward and you're focusing your time and energy on what's next. And that's where, oftentimes a layoff can feel like a roadblock, right? But if you can change that perspective to it being a detour to something else, you start to take the power back to yourself and how you can take the reins and be in the driver's seat and move this thing forward and put what's happened behind you.
Yeah. And I want to talk some more about the tools and the great questions that you asked that facilitate people to do that. But I also just want to reflect back on this idea of, what you resist persists, right? The more that we are in resistance to something that has already occurred, the less attention and energy we have available to make choices about our response to it and then what we choose next, and that future orientation. It strikes me as well that what's very useful about this perspective you're proposing of radical acceptance is also the calming of the nervous system, because a lot of what we talked about already is the emotional and psychological and kind of hyper alert experience of this is happening to me. It's happening really fast. It's really unexpected. It's really out of my control. This may be very embarrassing in terms of how it's being handled. And all of that seems like a very, strong overstimulus of the system. So being able to find a way to calm that system down also opens up our ability to think and to take a broader perspective. One of the questions I sometimes use on the back of that when we're coaching through redundancy is, what if this is for you? Again, it's not really about whether or not that's true or not, because we could argue about that, but it's really about what is useful. Is it more useful?
Right. What's useful?
To embrace a radical acceptance of this is happening, it's painful, and I'm present with it. Is it useful to take the perspective, I wonder what could be for me as a result of this? Like, where could I go? And you talk, both in terms of your own experience and in terms of some really great practical tools about exploring where this future focus could take you and how to do that in a structured and thoughtful way. And this is very similar in some ways to the career equation, which is all about defining your individual philosophy and design and aspirations around career and regularly checking in on that. And if redundancy is anything, it's a great time to really give yourself that opportunity to stop and recalibrate and explore what success really means to you. So I'd love to know a little bit more, and I'm sure the audience would as well, about the elements that you think people should concentrate on when they're stepping into decision-making again about what the future might hold beyond a layoff.
You're right. In the midst of our careers and our jobs, we rarely have the time to pause and be introspective about our career path and if what we're doing is in alignment with our goals and our aspirations and our personal values and what brings us joy. The layoff gives you a pause. It's a forced pause, but it's a pause. And this is one of those things that you can take and you can embrace. And you can do the introspection of, do I like what I'm doing? Does it bring me joy? Am I happy to get out of bed in the morning? Does it align with my personal values? And maybe it's a paycheck. And a lot of times we just work for a paycheck, and that's okay. You can find the joy and passion alignment outside of your work. But sometimes, because we're working so hard, the work becomes our only thing. We set aside those other things. So regardless of where you find it in your job or your personal life, that exploration of finding your joy and your passion and your values, understanding, is my career path, does it have longevity? Or is my career path experiencing this redundancy in a way where if I continue to stay in it, will I just be made redundant again because the jobs are being eliminated due to competition or technology, things like AI, whatever it may be? Do you need to pivot in order to insulate yourself and give you the longevity you need? Do you need to reskill, upskill, find the transferable skills that when you do submit your resume, someone will see that you have applicable experience to make a career pivot? All of these things are how you find that, at the end of this journey on these 7 stages of grief, when you find the recovery and the renewal, this is kind of what the renewal phase is all about, is doing this self-work so that when you are looking for jobs and you're looking now to reemerge kind of the phoenix from the ashes, you find a way to transfer or translate what was a very difficult experience into something that can be beneficial. So those are all of the things that, I'll never say layoffs have a silver lining. Absolutely, layoffs suck. But there is some good that can come out of it. And I have found that after my layoffs, the place that I landed was usually better, usually had a better title, better pay, I enjoyed, I learned. So, all of that to say, there are great exercises in the book. And actually, at the end of each chapter, there are exercises that can help someone manage that particular stage of grief and move forward and move through so that you don't get stuck. And, I think people find it beneficial.
Absolutely. It's a lovely structured step-by-step process of understanding where you are, understanding how you feel about it, taking the chance to take care of yourself, to ask yourself some powerful questions about what brings joy, what success now means, what environments bring out the best in you, what your why is, and what your aspirations are going forward. And I thought it's an excellently structured and easy to read manual for that transformation and for transmuting, as you said, a sort of alchemical transformation about it's not what's happened, it's what you make it mean. And if you follow the layoff journey process, you can really make it meaningful. So I would highly endorse the book on that basis. And just finally, we always ask people, knowing what you know now, thinking about that bad conversation with your colleague and her side hustle, which, of course, now is, how do we better navigate the recognition that people have perhaps multiple careers and multiple interests and multiple sources of revenue and satisfaction. How do you think you would have navigated that differently? And what advice would you give, perhaps, for a manager who has a request from a member of their team to take time out to support their side project or a career that may end up being their future?
Yeah, I would absolutely look at it as a both and instead of an either or. I would have pushed back on my boss and said, listen, the goal here is that we accomplish our business planning project. And as long as we get the deliverables from her, what does it matter when or how we get them, as long as we get them and they're good and they're on time? So if she wants to go do her side hustle, that just means she has to work harder and get him to this on in a different way. But we can both succeed here when we can honor her passion and her joy. And we don't need to take that. We can both find a compromise where everybody here is happy. And I would have pushed for that. And hopefully I would be successful. In our dream world scenario, everything would have turned out and she would have gone on to be some world famous model. Who knows?
But yeah, being open to that, the win-win. Is there a way that we can get what we need and we can support you with other things that are important to you? Particularly in our context now, I think that people's expectations and hopes around navigating that have really changed, and the sense of what's possible has also expanded. So thank you so much for sharing all of your wisdom with us today. And please, can you let everybody know where we can get this amazing book from?
Yeah, thank you so much. You can get it at any bookstore that you like. Probably the easiest is if you go to Amazon.com and just type in The Layoff Journey. And but it is available at any bookstore. They'll order it for you. And I would love to connect with people. You can check out my website at thestevejaffe.com. You can find me on LinkedIn and Instagram. I have a blog on Substack. So I have all sorts of different places and ways to connect.
Excellent. And we will make sure to feature all of those in our show notes. And again, thank you so much, Steve, for all of your insights. And we look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thank you so much.
So for more information about the Career Equation and how it can benefit your organization, visit the website at thecareerequation.com or connect with Zoe Schofield or Erica Sosner on LinkedIn.